Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going deep on something that really messed with the financial world.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the market fallout after President Trump announced all those tariffs.
Right.
At first, you think, okay, tariffs, that's like political stuff. But this went way beyond that.
Absolutely.
This hit stocks, Bitcoin, even alcohol up in Canada.
Wow.
Yeah, it shows you how tangled up the global market really is.
It really is. It's like a perfect example of how something that seems like one little event,
Right.
like in this case, a policy decision, can trigger this huge chain reaction across the whole world.
Yeah.
What I think is fascinating is how fast and how dramatically those reactions can happen.
Totally. So to get us all on the same page, let's rewind back to the actual announcement.
Okay.
Trump announced tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China.
Right.
We're talking 25% on stuff coming in from Canada and Mexico and 10% on Chinese goods.
Yeah.
But there was this one detail that really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah.
Remember how they closed that $800 loophole for packages coming into the U.S. without tariffs?
Oh, yeah. That's a pretty big deal.
Right.
It is. And it's especially interesting because it shows a change in how the U.S. is handling trade.
Okay.
Especially with all this e-commerce going on.
Right.
Before that loophole, let smaller direct-to-consumer stuff skip the tariffs.
I see.
Closing it means they're moving toward a more complete, some might say, protectionist trade policy.
And the markets definitely noticed right away.
Oh, yeah.
U.S. stock futures went totally crazy. Dow futures down over 600 points. S&P 500 futures dropped almost 2%, and the Nasdaq took a dive, too, about 575 points.
Yeah,
It shows how worried investors were.
it does. The financial world loves being able to predict what's going to happen.
Right.
Tariffs make things super uncertain.
Uh-huh.
Investors start freaking out about trade wars, which can slow down the economy.
Yeah.
And that ends up hurting businesses and their own profits.
Makes sense.
So they got to react, and they usually do that by pulling out of riskier investments.
It wasn't just the usual markets feeling the pressure, though. The crypto world got hit, too. Bitcoin was above $100,000 for weeks. Then, bam,
Oh, wow.
down to 96 TAUs, 821 Town Direct.
That's a big drop.
Over $600 million wiped off its market cap just like that.
This is where you see how everything is connected.
Yeah.
Uncertainty in one place, like with global trade, can mess up markets that seem totally separate. It's a classic flight to safety response.
I see.
When things get shaky, investors ditch the risky stuff like crypto and go for safer, more stable investments.
It's like when you knock over one domino and then...
all falls down.
Right. And speaking of things falling, let's talk about how those countries reacted.
Okay.
They didn't just sit there and take it. Canada did something that really caught everyone's attention.
What was that?
They put their own 25% tariffs on over $100 billion worth of U.S. goods.
Oh.
And then they started pulling American alcohol off their shelves.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Canada's response was really fast and strategic.
Uh-huh.
Choosing those specific tariffs and then making that big statement by getting rid of American alcohol.
Right.
It shows they're trying to put pressure on the U.S., but also show people how much this could affect them.
And Mexico didn't just stand by either.
Nope.
They promised to retaliate too, and China said they're taking this to the World Trade Organization.
Oh, wow.
It felt like everyone was getting ready for a trade war.
And that's the scary part.
Right.
When these retaliations start, it's super hard to calm things down.
Yeah.
These reactions were just the beginning. To really understand how these tariffs will affect things in the long run, we got to look at the bigger picture.
Okay, so that's exactly where we're headed next.
That was good.
We'll be breaking down the possible long-term effects on the economy and the markets from all this trade tension.
Okay.
So stick with us. This deep dive is just getting started.
What we see with these tariffs is like a real-life example of how connected all the global markets are.
Yeah.
And it's not just like the immediate money stuff either.
Okay.
It goes deeper, it touches on like bigger trends and worries that have been building for a while.
You're talking about protectionism, right?
It's
That
exactly
idea that countries should protect their own industries and workers first.
right.
Even if it means putting up barriers to trade.
Exactly. And it's something that's been getting more popular in different parts of the world. There's a bunch of reasons why. But a lot of it is about economic anxiety.
Right.
As globalization has gotten faster, some people feel like they've been left behind.
I see.
They're worried about jobs disappearing and their living standards going down.
So are these tariffs a reaction to globalization?
Could be.
Like governments trying to take back some control and make the people who feel left behind feel better?
That's one way to see it.
Yeah.
The argument is that tariffs are needed to even things out,
Okay.
to protect industries here from unfair competition from other countries,
Okay.
especially countries that might be doing stuff like messing with their currency or stealing intellectual property.
But isn't there also a chance these tariffs could backfire? Like, could
Yeah.
they hurt the very industries they're supposed to be helping? I mean, couldn't they make prices higher for people
Sure.
and lead to fewer choices and even shortages of some stuff?
You're getting at a really important point.
Okay.
There's always a trade-off.
Right.
Tariffs can protect certain industries in the short term,
Yeah.
but they can also cause all sorts of unintended consequences.
Okay.
For example, tariffs on imported steel might help steel makers here, but it also makes steel more expensive for companies that use that steel to make their own products.
I see.
Those higher costs often end up getting passed on to consumers as higher prices.
It sounds like a really tricky balancing act
It is.
with no easy answers.
Yeah.
You've got some people who might benefit, but then others who could get hurt, all tangled up in this web of global markets.
That's right. It is a tricky balancing act, and that's why it's so hard to know what the long-term impact of these tariffs will be.
Yeah.
Things are always changing, and there are so many players involved,
Right.
each with their own goals and motivations.
Speaking of those players, what about international organizations like the World Trade Organization?
Yeah.
What do they do in all of this?
The WTO is super important in situations like this.
Okay.
Their main job is to make sure trade happens as smoothly, predictably, and freely as possible.
I see.
They set rules, provide a place for negotiations, and help resolve fights between member countries.
So if China takes this to the WTO, what could actually happen? What can the WTO really do to step in?
If a country thinks another country is breaking WTO rules,
Okay.
they can file a complaint, and that starts a formal process to settle the dispute.
Hmm.
It involves talks panels of experts and maybe even appeals.
I see.
If the WTO decides that a country is breaking the rules, they can allow other countries to retaliate,
Okay.
like by putting tariffs on that country to get them to comply.
So the WTO can't directly force a country to change its policies, but they can basically give other countries permission to retaliate if those policies are seen as unfair.
Right. The WTO is all about consensus and cooperation.
Oh.
They rely on member countries to keep their promises and follow the rulings of the dispute settlement body.
All right, so we've got all these different forces at play.
Right.
The interests of individual countries, the reactions of the markets, and the role of organizations like the WTO. It's a lot to figure out, and it feels like the stakes are really high.
They are.
I mean, we're talking about a possible all-out trade war.
Yeah, we are. And a long trade war could have some serious consequences.
Okay.
We could see global supply chains get messed up, leading to shortages of certain goods.
Right.
Prices would probably go up for a lot of things, which would contribute to inflation.
I see.
And then there's the risk of the global economy slowing down or even going into a recession.
It all sounds kind of scary.
Yeah.
Is there any reason to be optimistic, though? Is there a way out of this?
There's always hope.
Okay.
There are lots of examples where countries have managed to calm things down
Right.
and reach agreements through negotiation. It usually takes compromise from everyone involved and a willingness to address concerns without resorting to more retaliation.
So what would be the best case scenario here?
Ideally, the countries involved would sit down together,
Okay.
really wanting to find a solution that works for everybody.
Right.
Maybe they could agree to gradually get rid of the tariffs
Okay.
and promise to deal with specific trade practices that are causing problems.
I see.
Maybe they could find ways to strengthen the existing rules of global trade
Yeah.
to make sure everyone's playing by the same rules.
That sounds really tough,
It is.
especially with the way politics are these days.
Yeah,
But I guess it's better to think about what could go right
exactly.
than to just focus on the worst case scenarios.
Definitely. And even with all the uncertainty, there are things we can learn from all this.
Like what?
It shows how interconnected our world is,
Yeah.
how things one country does can affect everyone else. It also shows how important it is to understand how global trade works. And that balance between looking out for yourself and working together with other countries.
You know, all of this can feel kind of abstract and big picture,
Right.
but these trade disputes have real effects on our everyday lives.
They do. And those effects aren't always obvious right away.
Okay.
They can happen slowly and subtly, affecting what we can buy, how much things cost,
Yeah.
and even the choices we have as consumers.
I think that's a perfect lead in to the last part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Let's bring this down to a personal level.
Okay.
And look at how this might change the way people shop and make buying decisions in the next few months.
Makes sense.
Because in the end, that's where it all really matters, right?
Absolutely.
So we've been talking about tariffs and trade wars and, these huge global markets.
Right.
But I think it's really important to remember that this stuff actually affects all of us, as individuals.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It does. And sometimes those effects can be pretty unexpected and they can reach pretty far.
Exactly.
They can change things like the price of our coffee in the morning or whether we can even find our favorite gadgets.
Exactly. So let's focus on that now.
Okay.
How could this whole tariff thing affect the average person? What kind of changes might we see in the next few months?
Well, one of the first things people will probably notice is prices going up.
Makes sense.
When there are tariffs on stuff coming from other countries, those costs usually get passed on to the people buying this stuff.
Right.
So we could see price increases on a bunch of things like groceries, clothes, electronics, even cars.
Yeah, nobody likes seeing prices go up.
Nope.
But besides prices going up, could these tariffs also affect, whether we can even find certain products?
Yeah, definitely.
Could we start seeing shortages of things we're used to having?
It's possible tariffs can mess up those global supply chains.
Yeah.
It gets harder and more expensive for companies to import the stuff they need.
Okay.
So that could lead to delays, shortages, or even some products just disappearing from the stores.
I imagine this could also change the way people shop.
Yeah.
Do you think we might see people getting more careful about prices? Like more willing to switch to different brands or even put off buying things because of all this?
I think that's very likely. When prices are going up and there aren't as many choices, people tend to get more picky.
Yeah.
They might start looking for cheaper options.
Right.
Like switching to store brands or buying local or just cutting back on things they don't really need.
It's interesting to think about how these kinds of things can actually change our buying decisions, even if we don't realize it. And it's not just individual people either.
Right.
Businesses have to adapt too.
Absolutely. Companies that rely on importing a lot of their goods are going to have to make some tough choices. They might have to eat some of those extra costs, which could hurt their profits. Or they might have to raise prices for their customers.
Okay.
But that could mean losing some of their market share.
Right.
Some businesses might even try to switch to suppliers here in the U.S.,
I see.
even if it's not as efficient or as cheap.
So this whole tariff thing really sets off this chain reaction.
Yeah.
Going from the initial decision to businesses to consumers and then to the whole economy.
It all comes back around.
Yeah, it shows how connected we all are.
Exactly. And it shows how important it is to stay informed,
Yeah.
to understand these complicated issues and be ready to adapt because the world is always changing.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up our deep dive into what happened in the markets after Trump announced those tariffs.
Okay.
We talked about the initial reactions from the market, the bigger trends that are happening, and even how this could all affect the way people shop.
It's been a really interesting conversation.
It has.
And I hope it's helped our listeners understand a little bit more about how global trade works and how connected our world is.
Absolutely. And remember, this is just the start of the conversation.
Right.
Keep learning, ask questions, and form your own opinions.
Yeah, the more we all know, the better we'll be able to handle the challenges and the opportunities that are coming our way.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next time with another look at a fascinating and timely topic. Sounds good.
Until then, stay curious.